So we're doing this sort of
meeting is being recorded.
We're doing this mini forum for the judge candidates before we go into our sort of official forums for Attorney General and Comptroller. And so for the judge candidates, we're just going to very briefly have each one of them do a 2-minute intro, and then Cynthia is going to ask them each just one question, which they'll have 2 minutes to answer. So it's just sort of a very quickie before we turn to the AG and Comptroller, but we did want a chance to get to know the two candidates running for Circuit Court Judge.
Okay, thank you very much.
Linda, do you have the timer pinned so that people will be able to see it when I start it? Linda, you're on mute if you're answering me.
I have added it, and I am also
Okay.
our judge candidates.
Okay.
Great.
Everybody, am I missing something?
Okay, I'm ready to start the timer, Cynthia, as soon as you call on the first candidate.
All right, well, we'll start with our 2-minute intro, and I'm actually going to start with Judge Stephanie Porter.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Cynthia. I am Judge Stephanie Porter, and to give you guys a view of my personal background, I grew up in Vermont. Yes, a town right next to Bernie Sanders' hometown, but we didn't talk politics in our house. My husband, Ed, and I moved to Columbia in 1997 for the diversity and inclusion here in Columbia because we wanted to raise our 2 biracial daughters here, and they've grown up through the Oakland Mills feeder system here. Over the past 22 years, I built the experience necessary to become a judge. I clerked for a judge. I prosecuted child sex offenders, gang members, and I tried endless jury trials. As a magistrate, I presided over family law matters, delinquency and foster care cases, and now as a judge, I preside over civil and criminal jury trials and assure everyone's rights are perfected in a fair and impartial way. Every day as a judge in the courthouse, I watch struggling families from our community come through the doors. I witness the barriers that they face both in and out of the courthouse and advocate for solutions to those. I've advocated for mentoring programs for youth because we didn't have any. And now we have 2 mentoring programs that have served over 250 kids in our county. I aligned with reentry programs so parents could find jobs and support their kids. And I started a program at Oakland Mills High School there, serving over 300 kids. During the vetting process to become a judge, I interviewed with over 15 specialty bar associations in this county's Judicial Nominating Commission who recommended me for appointment. It's a vigorous process set out to assure that only those attorneys with experience necessary are appointed. I had the experience. That is what's necessary, and I ask for your vote on July 19th.
Okay. Thank you. That was Judge Stephanie Porter. And next we have candidate for Judge Alicia Altimorano. 2 minutes on the clock for your introduction.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Columbia Democratic Club, for allowing this space that promotes democratic values. I am the only Democrat running in this race for Circuit Court Judge. My name is Alicia Altimorano. I bring a rich history with me to the bench. What I learned as a child living in undocumented neighborhoods, over-policed, and where the authorities were not your friend, motivated me to become the defendant of the people, the defender of the people and the attorney for the people. So when I graduated from law school, I decided that I was going to defend our community. And I started my solo practice out of the basement of my home. I worked graveyard shifts at Central Booking, defending the indigent that were charged with crimes, some very serious crimes. And while I did that during the day, I went home and practiced in the following areas of law: family, which includes divorce, custody, guardianships, paternity, property dispute. I also assist and protected those facing domestic violence as I collaborate with Hope Works here in Howard County. I assist people in immigration also. I fight for their constitutional rights with high stakes cases. I am an expert at defending people. I have litigated for hundreds of families throughout the state of Maryland Maryland. So my lived experience that I have, not because I've lived it through other people, but because I've lived it myself, only strengthens my legal experience that will follow me to the bench, where I know what it takes to highlight and make sure that everyone is treated fairly. That is why I know that if you vote for me on the bench, I will undoubtedly be the judge for the people. Vote for me, Alicia Altimorano, the only person with lived experience and legal experience that will help everybody in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and as we said, this is a mini forum. I do have several questions to choose from. I'm going to choose, the one I'm choosing is because there's been a lot of discussion around this over the last couple of elections, and there may end up being some referendums. And so I'm going to ask, I'm going to start with Judge Porter. Do you think judges should be elected or appointed, and why?
I believe in the vetting process that I went through, Cynthia and everyone. I mentioned how there were 15 bar associations that I interviewed with. Those bar associations represent a great deal of diversity across the state, the diversity in attorneys that try cases, as well as the diversity in clients that they represent, who all vet the candidates and give their recommendations. And the judicial nominating commissions evaluate each and every candidate to make sure that they have the experience that's necessary. This is not a learn on the job kind of position. You can't walk in one day and try to begin that foundation. You need to have the years of experience with trial work, with jury trial work, with criminal, with civil, with family law, and complicated matters. Because you have to do that and protect everybody's rights that come through the courthouse. And I think that some of what we see that becomes involved here is politics becomes involved in the in this process, and politics doesn't have a space in the courtroom. Everything has to be done in a fair and impartial way, and we have to set those things aside and listen to each and every case and everyone that walks through that courtroom, no matter what our feelings are, and listen to the cases and make our best judgments in fair and impartial ways in accordance with the law. That's what I've been doing, and that's what I will continue to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, and I will ask the same question of candidate for Judge Alicia Altimorano. Do you think judges should be elected or appointed, and why?
Cynthia, I am not against the process of being elected, but I stand for democracy. Imagine if we didn't have the right to vote or choose our president. Imagine if we didn't have the right to vote or choose for our executives, our county executive, our state's attorneys, our sheriffs, or the members of the Board of Education. So why are we letting someone else dictate who will be our judges? Why are we allowing for someone else, for a group of people that are vetters that have no one vetting them, to allow to choose the judges for us? We have this right to choose the judge that shares our values. Politics has no place in the court, but values do. Let's just see what happened just a few weeks ago in the highest court of the land. We did not have the opportunity to choose those judges. And this is what we're facing now. We are facing the threat of our fundamental rights. So let's remember that when we vote, not just for judges, but for anybody, that not only are we now have this right to choose the judges, we can inform ourselves, and it's not in the hands of someone else. And that's why it's important for us to exercise our right to vote and make sure we understand what that person on the bench is going to do for everybody. It's just not about choosing someone because someone else chose them for you. This is your opportunity. You have the right, you have the voice to vote. And I ask you to vote for me, the only Democrat here, because I do share your values. I also have the experience, and when I get on the bench, my lived experience will follow me to the bench. It has been devalued, but it's something very necessary because it's important. We have to highlight the vulnerable communities that we live in, because that's the only way that members of society can make sure that justice is for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we did say a mini forum that was one question each. So I thank you both for your thoughtful answers. We don't have any questions from the chat. So I would just remind everyone that this mini forum for the circuit court judges, this is Judge Stephanie Porter and candidate for Judge Alicia Altimorano, will be posted on our YouTube channel when we put the video up. So thank you to you both for joining us today. We appreciate your time and your thoughtful attention. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So as we reset the timer, everyone, I am very excited to welcome to the floor our candidates for Attorney General for the state of Maryland. We have with us Congressman Anthony Brown and Judge Katie Curran O'Malley. So we are going to set the timer for 4 minutes and start with your introduction and opening statements. So I believe I will begin with Congressman Anthony Brown.
You want to give me the thumbs up or when should I begin?
You can begin when you're ready. We have the timer up. And can you see the timer? Let me ask you that.
I do see the timer. Yes, okay. Indeed. I don't see numbers. It says blue sky timer.
It's gonna, hold on. Dawn, are we good? She might be changing the amount of time.
Oh, she may be changing the time. Okay.
Sorry, I had to find where my unmute was. Yes, it's set for 4. I think the numbers will start counting when I hit start.
That's what I thought. Okay. Well, you're ready to go then.
Well, good evening, and I want to thank the Columbia Democratic Club for hosting us this evening and the work that you do to build a strong Democratic team in Columbia and in Howard County. I'm Anthony Brown, and I'm running to be your Attorney General. I have nearly 3 decades as an attorney, both representing clients and serving the public. I have experiences ranging from a 2nd Lieutenant of the United States Army to a 3-term member of the United States Congress. And through all of this, I know that Marylanders deserve an Attorney General who will be their champion for change and not accept the status quo. As a state, we've made a lot of progress over the years, but I believe that too many barriers exist for too many Marylanders. Many of those barriers created and perpetuated by structural racism and racial bias, from healthcare and housing to the environment and education, in the workplace, policing, and the criminal justice system. So I'm running for Attorney General to dismantle those barriers, to make government work again, and to fight for the changes that will protect every person and empower every community. As Maryland's chief legal officer, I'll represent the state, but I'll work for the people. I'll investigate problems, I'll champion legislative change, and I'll set enforcement priorities that are consistent with the people who elect me. So whether we're working on, tackling the rise in crime or improving public safety, addressing the climate crisis and environmental justice, dealing with affordable healthcare or housing, or defending against attacks on women's reproductive freedom, whether we're protecting consumers or seniors or veterans or immigrants and refugees, even voting rights, workers' rights, or the rights of the LGBTQIA+ communities. And even when we're holding public officials, including law enforcement, accountable, I'll work for the people, I'll fight for justice, I'll fight for everyone. I've spent a great deal of my professional career as a lawyer in public service that has been personally rewarding and I believe impactful for the people who I serve. I have a record of working on difficult problems and delivering the change that people expect and deserve. Sometimes we think nothing gets done in Congress or that not enough gets done in Annapolis, but that hasn't been my experience. During my 6 years in Congress, we've gotten big things done. The CARES Act that helped families and small businesses survive the pandemic, hospitals treat COVID patients, and to develop the testing, the vaccinations, and the therapeutics to save lives. We passed the American Rescue Plan to help state and local governments recover from the pandemic, to open schools safely, and to return to the new normal. We finally reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act that funds so many programs to reduce domestic violence and assist survivors. We passed the First Step Act during my time in Congress, major criminal justice reform to reduce recidivism and to reform federal sentencing. We passed the Infrastructure Investment Act to finally get back to investing in our communities, and we prevented Republicans from repealing the Affordable Care Act. We've also gotten big things done in the House that have been blocked by Senate Republicans. We've got the Elijah Cummings Prescription Drug Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the Women's Health Protection Act to enshrine Roe versus Wade into law. We passed universal background checks, red flag laws, Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, this week, Infant Formula Relief Act, and Anti-Price Gouging Act. And as Lieutenant Governor and a delegate, I've been able to work on big issues with stakeholders across the state to improve the quality of life in Maryland, whether coordinating for the arrival of 50,000 jobs through base realignment and closure, working on medical malpractice reform, domestic violence protections for victims, survivors, and their families. So I wanted to emphasize that my service has been one of tackling big problems, the kinds of problems that your Attorney General will continue to face in years to come.
Thank you very much. And that is Congressman Anthony Brown running for Attorney General. And next up, with your 4-minute introduction, I'd like to bring forward Judge Katie Curran O'Malley.
Thank you, Alicia. And I want to thank the whole Columbia Democratic Club for having us on here tonight to talk about the important work in the Attorney General's office. I appreciate all of your time. I am Katie Curran O'Malley, and I want to be your next Attorney General. And that's because I understand what the office does. And I understand it because of all the years of experience that I've had working in Maryland's courtrooms. And guess what? Attorney Generals go to court. The Attorney General herself will be going to court. It's a huge part of the job. For the first 10 years of my career, I was an assistant state's attorney in Baltimore County with Judge Stephanie Porter for part of that time. And I tried cases ranging from petty thefts to homicides. Before I left that office, I was head of the white collar crime unit. That sadly was a unit that, we found bad actors preying on our seniors many times in those cases. So I've worked with investigators, detectives, I've worked with witnesses, I've worked with victims. I've tried, like I said, hundreds of cases in front of judges and jurors. And I even worked across the aisle with defense counsel to come up with the just remedies through being an assistant state's attorney. It's not all about just cracking down on crime. It's about finding solutions to keep our community safe. And then for the past 20 years, I've been sitting in the District Court of Maryland, where I have literally presided over thousands of cases, not just criminal cases, but our civil cases. And I've worked in landlord-tenant courts where literally on one docket, you can have 500 people. Managing those dockets on a daily basis for 20 years has always been a challenge, but it's something that I thoroughly enjoyed because I wanted to make sure every single citizen that walked in the door in the district court, which is the busiest court in the state of Maryland, got the justice that they deserved, got the time that they deserved. They were listened to. And, when you're talking about the Attorney General's office, you're talking about the chief law enforcement officer for the state. And she will be working with the other assistant attorney generals who are working in consumer protection on very big cases, taking those cases to court, making sure there's not unfair practices in advertising or unfair practices in any type of consumer deals, whether it's talking about mortgages or whether we're talking about the state's lemon laws. Your Attorney General also is very, very much a part of protecting our environment, making sure not just in the environmental crimes unit, which involves taking complaints from DNR and the Department of Environment, as well as citizens, but also making sure that our farms are complying with regulations that they need to comply with so that we are, in fact, not polluting our lands and our water and our air, and going after big corporations that are also a part of climate change and the problem when it comes to climate change in our environment. So your Attorney General uses the courts to do that action. It also plays a huge role when we're talking about criminal justice reform and public safety. And when it comes to criminal justice reform, the Attorney General needs to be someone that's actually tried a criminal case in Maryland. I'm the only candidate in the Democratic primary that has tried a criminal case in the state of Maryland. And it's important that you have that knowledge and that you have that experience, because you will be strategizing and working with the lawyers in your office that handle organized crime cases, but also who defend all of the criminal cases when they're on appeal. 40% of the work in the Court of Special Appeals and Court of Appeals are done by assistant attorney generals. You can't lead an office where there's all this work in court if you don't have that genuine experience, the intuition to know how to cross-examine a witness, all the complicated laws of hearsay. Defending Marylanders' rights means you need to have a lawyer that's actually been there in the trenches. You know, we're now facing issues with, you know, reproductive rights. And in Maryland, we have to stand strong. We need to get more women involved in the political process. And that's one of the reasons I'm running, as well as protecting our voting rights and protecting the community of the LGBTQIA society. So those are the reasons why I'm running. Thank you so much for letting me have an opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. Okay, so I have 3 questions, and so the first one, I'll start with Governor Hogan. He signed an anti-BDS bill, an executive order prohibiting all executive branch agencies from entering into contracts or conducting official state business with any other entity unless they are certifying they will not engage in a boycott of Israel during the duration of the contract. Just giving some background from our membership who might not be aware. So my question, I'll start with Congressman Brown. What is your position regarding Governor Hogan's anti-BDS executive order, and do you believe this is constitutional?
Yeah, I actually do believe it's constitutional, and it's an issue that's come up on Capitol Hill because, as you probably know, the issue has been presented in Congress. Senator Cardin was one of the chief authors on the Senate side. You know, Israel is an important ally for the United States. It's the only democracy in that very rough neighborhood of the world. And we have a strong relationship. It's not just a military relationship. We have shared economic interests, shared innovation and science and other technologies. So when other countries tell US companies that they cannot do business in a country if they're doing business in Israel, I think that's wrong. I think that US companies should be able to do business in any country around the world and not be limited simply because they're doing business in Israel. So when a company decides not to do business in Israel because another country is forcing them to do that, I think that we should tell those companies that you can't do business in Maryland. That's my opinion, and certainly as the Attorney General, I would offer an opinion that that type of executive order by the governor is a lawful order. And I recognize that it's controversial, but that it is a lawful order. I do think it promotes an important value, which is our relationship with Israel. I know it's not so often that what we do in Maryland as a state has international implications, but having served on Capitol Hill, very familiar with that relationship and the implications, I would say, yes, I would support that. I do support that. And as Attorney General, I think you can defend the governor's executive order.
All right, it's ready for me. So again,
Cynthia, you're muted.
Cynthia's muted, but I'm not, right?
Yeah, go right ahead. Same question.
So, you know, I don't agree with a lot of things that Governor Hogan has done over these past 8 years, but this is one where I would say I do agree. I believe that it is constitutional. You know, I've traveled to Israel. We do have a very, very strong relationship with the country of Israel, and it's a very strong special relationship that we've had for many, many years. So I think, just as the Congressman said, that it would be constitutional and I would support it. And it is something that I think is important for us here in Maryland to be a part of. So again, you know, I don't have much more to add other than what the Congressman said. But I understand that there's controversy with it, but I do believe that it's constitutional and would support that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so 2 more minutes on the clock. I will ask Judge O'Malley, how have your values been reflected in the work that you've done in the past? Yes.
Thanks. So my values, I think, are reflected in the work that I've chosen. I grew up in Maryland. I've lived all my life in Baltimore, but for a short period of time in Annapolis, raised my kids in Baltimore City, and grew up with some really decent parents, my father and mother. My mother always inspired me to work for justice, to work for equality. My grandmother worked during the Depression and had to lie about the fact that she was married so that she could keep her job. So being a strong woman and making sure that I had my own career was something my mother always pushed me to do. And working in public service is an area that I chose because of the work that my parents had done in politics in the community, reflected an image of equality and justice for all. I'm proud to say that my father was the longest serving attorney general here in Maryland and stood for so many issues that were for equality and justice when it came to a woman's right to choose, when he was against the Vietnam War, when he was against the death penalty. So that's how I grew up, and that's really reflected how I've worked in the courtrooms. As a prosecutor, I saw early on how victims of domestic violence were treated so unfairly by the judges, by the judiciary. And so I worked hard to make sure that victims had a voice in the courts. And when I became a judge, I was charged with the duty of teaching judges across our state as well as our country on best practices in domestic violence cases, because I saw the injustice and also the danger of judges who didn't understand the law and who didn't understand how fragile these victims were and how they needed the services of the court, not to criticize them and to put them down, but to lift them up so that they could break from the chains of violence. So I think the way that, that I grew up with the great mother and father that I had sort of leading the charge when I was a kid, when it came to issues like justice, taking me to rallies to fight for equality, going to gun rallies with my dad to fight to go back after the NRA. These are all things that have reflected in what my values are. And I think I've reflected those values in how I've raised my 4 great kids.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and for Congressman Brown, same question. How have your values reflected in the work that you have done in the past?
I'm a first-generation American. My father came to this country out of poverty in Jamaica for a better life for himself and his family that he would eventually raise. Couldn't get into medical school in this country, primarily because of the color barrier. He went to Switzerland, got a medical degree, and then when he came back, he did what so many new Americans and immigrants do. He set out to make a difference in the lives of the people he touched. My father instilled in me the sense of service. I didn't go to medical school. I went to law school, but not only a sense of service, but a sense of doing right for people. And that has been the lens through which I've done everything as a public servant. For example, I'm a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I'm probably one of the most outspoken members of that caucus when it comes to LGBTQ issues. I took on the Trump administration when they tried to ban transgender Americans from serving the military. I'm a proud parent of a transgender son. I took on marriage equality when, we saw some states passing it, others not. We knew we had to step up. And in participating and being a co-lead in that effort, I was the chief advocate in Prince George's County, a county that actually voted against marriage equality. But because I knew it was the right thing to do, I advocated for it. And thank goodness the majority of Marylanders passed it into law. In 1998, I was one of the floor debaters. This was only 6 years after Maryland codified Roe versus Wade to defeat the effort to ban partial birth abortions in Maryland. And in my time on Capitol Hill, on the Armed Services Committee, I have devoted 95% of my time to protecting Black and brown members of the military who deserve to be treated fairly in the military justice system, to be able to rise in the ranks as their white counterparts. That is not the case in today's military. It's sad, and that's what I've been fighting for. Raising a family where service was important and equity, justice, and fairness was always emphasized.
Thank you very much. All right, so third question with 2 minutes. I will start with Congressman Brown. Tell us what makes you uniquely qualified to be the next Attorney General for the state of Maryland. I know you've covered a lot, but we'd like to hear that answer.
When you think about the Office of the Attorney General, it's the largest public interest law firm in the state. It has divisions that range from consumer protection to environmental protection. You've got a small division, but an important division that deals with criminal investigations and prosecutions. You've heard some of that mentioned earlier. I mentioned the consumer protection. There's a civil rights division. The Office of the Attorney General needs a leader who can provide the value, the judgment, the experience, and the record of getting big things done. There's no person who's ever run for Attorney General that has expertise in all of the areas of the Office of the Attorney General, whether it's antitrust, right? Whether it's labor law. But what the Attorney General brings is a breadth of experience. And if you look at the past Attorney Generals, many of them have served in the state legislature with that experience, because the Attorney General, I think the most effective are those that also bring about change in the law. I think about Brian Frosch. He worked with the General Assembly, passed the Maryland Defense Act, which would not have happened with him without Brian Frosch. And it happened because of his experience in the General Assembly, which gave his office the authority to challenge the Trump administration and the federal government, whether it was the EPA, the Department of Labor, when they were doing harm to Maryland. Brian Frosch was out front in banning ghost guns, advocating for change in the law. So yes, you supervise attorneys that go to court, and there are a lot of attorneys in the Office of the Attorney General that has more experience than any of the candidates running for Attorney General today. But what you also need is an advocate for change. And that's what I will bring as the next Attorney General.
Thank you very much. All right, Judge Katie Curran O'Malley, tell us what makes you uniquely qualified to be the next Attorney General for the state of Maryland.
Well, it is the breadth of experience, and it's the breadth of experience of working in Maryland's courts. That's what the Attorney General does with 400 plus lawyers working in Maryland's courts, the district, the circuit, the appellate courts. Like I said, 40% of the work done in our appellate courts are done by attorney generals. It is a lot of work in the court, and understanding the rules of court procedure, understanding how to present a case in front of a judge rather than a jury, when to settle, when not to settle, when to continue to push. Certainly about 90 days of the year, you are, as an attorney general, working with the legislature and building relationships with the legislature so that you can pass laws and reform laws that aren't working. But you have to have that day-to-day knowledge of how our court systems work. Just last week, Brian Frosch, or 2 weeks ago, was up in Harford County defending Anton's Law, which was a sweeping police reforms that passed in 2021. And he had to go to court because the Harford County Sheriff wasn't complying with the law. He had to go up there and do that and make sure that Harford County was in compliance and investigating police-involved deaths. So that's the type of knowledge and experience that you need. It's not a political job. It's really a job for someone who knows and has worked with the rule of law, not the rule of politics. It's a job for an experienced lawyer. Our past 4 attorney generals all have had extensive trial courtroom experience. I'm the only one in this primary that's tried a criminal case in Maryland that's actually been in the courts in a relevant way for the past 30 years. 2 of the past attorney generals actually had no legislative experience. That was the great Steve Sachs and Montgomery County's Doug Gansler. So it's really a job for someone who understands how to work with attorneys, how to go to court, present cases in court, to defend our rights each and every day in Maryland, our voting rights, our reproductive rights, protecting the community, the LGBTQIA. You need an attorney general that understands that.
Cynthia, you're muted.
Thank you. We do have a question for the chat. I'd like to give you both a minute, to answer. I'll start with Congressman Anthony Brown. And the question is, how would you see your role as Attorney General in being able to ensure that the people of Maryland continue to have adequate and effective access to abortion?
Thank you. And, Roe versus Wade was passed by the Supreme Court in 1973. It took almost 19 years for Maryland to codify that into law, into statute. And it's not in the Maryland Constitution. I was in Annapolis during the last legislative session, testifying in support of of Adrian Jones, Speaker Jones' effort to put it in the Maryland Constitution. And while I think, we should understand that having those protections enshrined in statute is just as sufficient as having it in the Maryland Constitution, as Attorney General, I would push to put it in the Constitution because that's an even stronger statement about our values as Marylanders, that women have the right, the privacy interests, and the liberty to choose to make those decisions about her health and whether or not to have a child. So I would do that. I would also continue to do the things that I did this legislative session, going to Annapolis to advocate for more money for abortion services. We already know that in Maryland.
Sorry to cut you off, but your time is up. This was only a 1 minute rather than a 2 minute.
Oh, I'm
one.
sorry. I thought it was a 2 minute. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot more to say.
Well, thank you.
Right.
Same question for Judge O'Malley.
Listen, this isn't an issue for me. This is real life. This is a gut punch. What could be possibly happening with the overturning of Roe v. Wade? My mother who's 85, lived during a time when abortions were illegal, and had many of her friends and family members had to get abortions in back streets, alleys, and basements. And so this is a really troubling thing. Here in Maryland, we have great lawmakers right now that are protecting our right. And we've got the Access Care Abortion Act that was passed in the last session. We need to get a constitutional amendment here in Maryland, but we also need to make Maryland more of a sanctuary state for women who are around our state that are coming, and making sure that we don't work with Louisiana when they have a writ of extradition to take a woman back to Louisiana if she gets abortion services here in Maryland. We need to come up with ways to do that, to make sure that our practitioners are not getting fined, our nurse practitioners or our doctors are not getting fined, or their licenses aren't being attacked from other states' laws. So we need to write opinions as the Attorney General to make that a safe space for people, so that the people who come to the state or aid and abet people who come to the state are protected by our laws here, and that we don't participate with any of these other laws. And we can do that through Attorney General opinions. Again, this is not a matter that is an issue, for many politicians. It's an issue. For me, it's real life.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off too. 1 minute is short, I know.
It's fine.
It is. Okay, speaking of short, we're actually going to move into our lightning round. This is 10 seconds. So for both of you, I will start with Judge O'Malley. In 10 seconds, we would just like to know your top priority if elected Attorney General.
Right now, I think everybody across our state says it's crime and that we have to do what we can to save lives. Too many lives are being lost in Baltimore, but all across our state. And in the organized crime division, the Attorney General has a huge role to play in that.
Thank you. All right. And then for Congressman Brown, again, your top priority if elected as Attorney General.
Public safety and fixing our broken criminal justice system. I don't know if it's prosecutors, judges, or juries. We incarcerate Black men age 18 to 24 at higher rates than any other state. We have a highest percentage of Black men in prison, even higher than Mississippi. The system's broken. I'll fix it.
Okay. Thank you very much. And that is the conclusion of our forum for the candidates for Attorney General of Maryland. That is Congressman Anthony Brown and Judge Katie Curran O'Malley. Thank you both for your time and your thoughtful attention.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Before you go, I'm sorry. I wanted to give you the courtesy of 1 more minute, just a closing statement, what you'd like to leave us with and what you'd like to part with. I'll start with Judge O'Malley.
Thank you. Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks for the whole Columbia Democratic Club for having us here tonight to talk about this unique role of the Attorney General. Oftentimes people get confused. They're like, are you the state's attorney? Are you the Attorney General? Again, we've talked about it. It's the chief law enforcement officer of the state. So protecting Marylanders when it comes to consumer protection, criminal justice reform, public safety, making sure police are transparent and accountable, protecting our environment, advising all the state agencies on the law, writing opinions about important things like voting rights and abortion rights, and protecting communities like the LGBTQIA communities. So it's a huge role, and it's a role for a lawyer that's actually been in courtrooms in Maryland in a relevant way. And again, I'm the only candidate in this race that has tried a criminal case here in the state of Maryland and have actually been working in courts within the past 20, 30 years. So it's a job for someone who knows the courts and knows how to work with lawyers that go to court every day to protect Marylanders. And that's why I want your vote. Thank you so much for having me here tonight.
Thank you. All right, and then 1 minute for Congressman Brown. Your
Thank
closing
you.
remarks.
Thank you. People often ask me, what would you do to build on the work of Attorney General Brian Frost, because he's done such a fantastic job. And what I would do is work with the General Assembly, because that office needs greater authorities. Many Marylanders don't understand, but the Office of the Attorney General doesn't even have the authority to enforce federal and state civil rights laws. Many people don't understand, but the Office of the Attorney General, while it can enforce environmental crimes, cannot inspect and enforce other environmental infractions that fall short of criminal activity. Many Marylanders don't understand that the Attorney General today can't enforce most of the federal and state labor laws that protect men and women in the workplace from wage theft and misclassification and labor trafficking. In order for those authorities to be granted, you need an Attorney General who understands how to get things done in Maryland, so that that office can do a much broader job in protecting the citizens of Maryland. I'm the only Attorney General candidate who's got that kind of experience. So I ask you for your support, your endorsement, and your vote on July 19th.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. And if you would, before you leave, drop your information in the chat so that people will have your contact information if they need it. We're going to keep moving now. Thank you all to the comptroller candidates. We have with us this evening Mayor Tim Adams and Delegate Brooke Lierman. So good evening.
Good evening.
We're going to start with 4-minute introductions for each of you, and then we will go to 3 different questions and then a question from the chat, and close out as we normally do. So are we ready with the timer at 4 minutes?
Give me 1 second to find him.
Okay. All right.
I pinned him yet. Oh, there he is.
Oh, no, I did see him. So, okay. Well, I tell you what, we'll start with Mayor Tim Adams. Are we ready with 4 minutes? We are. Okay. All right. Very good. The floor is yours, Mayor Adams.
Hey, good evening, and thank you for inviting us this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, as I'm sure all of the candidates do. For those who don't know me, I'm Mayor Tim Adams. A little bit on my background. I started off like many of you in very financially challenging times. Though we didn't have much, I always had a lot of love. And my parents always instilled in us the sense of giving back, of being part of the community. I am a father, a husband, and a grandfather. I started out, finished high school in a public high school, went to college at Xavier University in New Orleans, at HBCU, did a co-op as a chemist, decided I didn't want to be a chemist the rest of my life, went on, got my MBA, and moved to the West Coast. There I got recruited into aerospace, and not knowing any better, I decided to start my own engineering firm. I was taken under the wing of a woman by the name of Anise Eisler, who taught me weapons systems and support equipment. And from there, out of the trunk of my car, I started SATEC, and now it's one of the largest Black-owned businesses in the entire nation. Every day, hundreds and hundreds of men and women get up and put on my SATEC badge and go out and do national defense and national security. I operate out of 23 different states, and at any time I have teams all around the world. After that executive leadership and learning how to make the hard decisions and building budgets and managing money and managing people in very diverse locations and all, people came to me and asked me to run for mayor for the city of Bowie. I agreed to do so, and contrary to people saying I could never do it, it could never happen in Bowie, I became the first African-American ever elected mayor in the city of Bowie in 138 years. But what that shows is that's about executive leadership. So I bring with me, running for the comptroller's race, 30 years of executive experience, leadership, particularly on the financial side in both the public and the private sector. As mayor, I've had to balance budgets and make sure that we maintain our AAA rating and watch how we spend our money, just like in my business. The comptroller is the chief fiscal officer of the state of Maryland, which means he's the one who's responsible for watching how we spend our dollars. But understand, the comptroller isn't just the tax collector. He's the paymaster, and he's the one who has to pay all the vendors and all of the state employees, just like I have to make a payroll for all of my people. He's someone who has to estimate what the income will be for the state, and just like I have to do for my business. He's the one who has to really give that information so that the governor and the legislature can make good budgets and monitor that. He has to estimate how much money we can borrow and to make sure we can maintain our AAA rating. All of those are things that I bring 30 years of experience to. But more importantly, it's the Board of Public Works. You know, we have to do accountability where everybody pays their fair share of taxes as the taxpayer. But also in the Board of Public Works, that's where we award all our contracts and bond bills. That's why we need to have inclusion. We really need to have equity and justice there. And I bring that experience because I've been fighting for that successfully for 30 years, all across this country. I understand how to build businesses. I understand what businesses need. I understand how to read contracts and understand the games that some of the sly prime contractors try to use to get around, you know, fulfilling the minority participation rules and policies. I know what it's like to have people try to run those things where we don't have our fair share. And that's what we have to work for, equity and inclusion for everyone. And I have 30 years of experience to do that.
I need to cut you off. I'm sorry, your time is up.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor Tim Adams, introduction. And next, Delegate Brooke Lierman, if we have 4 minutes on the clock for her introduction.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with all of you. Thank you, Cynthia, Madam President, for having us. Thank you for organizing this. Thank you for organizing the great race and all your really impressive and creative organizing skills. Thanks all for being here on a beautiful Thursday night. I'm Brooke Lierman. I'm a state delegate. I represent District 46 in Baltimore. I'm mom to 2 kids. I'm a disability and civil rights attorney, and I'm thrilled to be running to be your next state comptroller. For the first time since 1998, we have an open seat for state comptroller. And to me, what that means for all of us is that 2022 election is really our chance to decide that in Maryland, we can be bold and we can do better. And that's really what I've spent my life doing. I graduated from public high school here in Maryland. I went off to college. I saw a huge disparity that existed between my beautiful college campus and the rural poverty that surrounded it in New Hampshire. So I worked with friends to start a mentoring program, working with children in public housing that today exists in 4 states and works with thousands of children. As an attorney, I then have been leading and winning for working people. I've represented unpaid, low-wage workers all over the country. I represent people with disabilities who just want a chance to reach their full potential. I've done procurement for federal and state procurement cases for blind-owned businesses around the nation. And I've represented people like a wrongfully convicted man who was wrongfully convicted and spent 21 years of his life in jail and won the largest settlement against the Baltimore Police Department in history. But it wasn't enough. And so in my new adopted hometown of Baltimore, I saw huge challenges and I wanted to do more. So I ran for state delegate. And for the past 8 years, I've loved working with all of your delegates, your state senators whose support I'm proud to have. You know, I've been a fiscal leader helping oversee our $52 billion budget. I serve as the chair of the Joint Committee on Pensions. I've helped lead to pass the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, pass the nation's first styrofoam ban, support our small businesses, and this past session, of course, be a leader on reproductive health care. I am so excited about what the comptroller can do for us in the state of Maryland, because the comptroller is this essential, important statewide voice, right? It's one of only 3 independently elected statewide offices. And we need a voice who can advocate on the major economic challenges facing our state, the racial wealth divide, and confronting the challenge of climate change. And I'm excited to bring my experience to do that. We also need somebody who's, you know, the comptroller also has this important role on the State Retirement and Pension Board, and of course, the essential role on the Board of Public Works. Those are places where we have to know how state government works so that we can use our dollars in a way that truly uplifts our communities, that helps tackle economic inequity in the state of Maryland and creates more financially resilient families, communities, and small businesses. You know, so many who suffered during the pandemic, especially our Black-owned businesses who, you know, are denied loans at twice the rate of our white-owned businesses. There's so much we need to do from the Board of Public Works and pension system. And then third, of course, the third role of the comptroller is to be the tax collector, the tax administrator. And there we have to make sure that the biggest companies, that they're paying their fair share. You know, I've represented low-wage workers against companies who aren't paying their workers. And I see that if you're not paying your workers, you're not paying your taxes. And we're going to make sure that they do pay their taxes. I also, you know, we passed the largest earned income tax credit in the nation. We've got to make sure that our working Marylanders, our low-income Marylanders, are getting that tax credit that should be theirs. I fundamentally believe that we all do better when we all do better, in the words of Senator Paul Wellstone, who I used to work for. And I'm excited because I know if we go bold, then over the next 4 years, we can make Maryland better for the next 40 years. So I'm excited for the conversation ahead. Thanks for organizing this, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's get into our next question. There are many people on here that might not necessarily know what is the most important part of the job of comptroller. I will start with Delegate Lierman.
Thank you. And we have 2 minutes or 1 minute?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. I see the magic timer. The most important job of the comptroller is to make sure that we are using the comptroller's office and the resources of the comptroller's office to really combat economic inequality in the state of Maryland, to grow our economy so it works for everyone. And you do that using all the different levers in the comptroller's office, right? Because the comptroller is the elected CFO of the state. And as the elected CFO, needs to make sure that every family's financial health is sound, that every company's financial health is sound, because that means the financial health of the state is sound. You do that as the tax administrator, right? Helping small businesses, make it easier to pay taxes, making sure that they can invest in their workforce and in their jobs, right? And in their business rather than in tax attorneys and accountants to help, combat, complicated tax laws. We do it from the Board of Public Works to make sure that we're spending on our money in a way that brings in best value and doesn't waive MBE, minority business enterprise requirements, and actually invest in our Black-owned businesses, our women-owned businesses, our immigrant-owned businesses, making sure that those people who are bringing their talents to Maryland and want to start their business in Maryland can stay and thrive in Maryland. And of course, 415,000 state retirees rely on our pension plan. And we need to make sure that our pension system is working to help get that money to our seniors and older adults to make sure that they can keep thriving. So the job of the comptroller is really to make sure that every business and every family and every community is meeting its full financial potential, right? Is thriving and prospering. Because if the comptroller does that, then everything else falls into place. So that's what I'm excited to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, same question for Mayor Tim Adams. The most important job of the comptroller, 2 minutes.
The most important job of the comptroller is about accountability and justice. Accountability means understanding that the true watchdog of how the government spends the money is the comptroller. It's someone who needs to understand and know business and understand financial means. It's not a job for a legislator. It's for someone with executive experience, someone who can do that. So it's about making sure that everybody pays their fair share in taxes. That the tax burden doesn't fall on just the working men and women of the state or on the small businesses, but that we make sure we do everything we can to make sure that we identify those who aren't paying their fair share and making sure we contribute to that. The other part of that is about justice. It's about equity and inclusion. That is a huge part of what the comptroller needs to do. You see, with that Board of Public Works and that vote on the Board of Public Works, we need somebody who understands contracts, and we need somebody who understands the challenges that minority and women and others face. We talk about the MBE program that is hitting nowhere near what it needs to be. And it needs someone who understands contracts. which I've done as a federal vendor for over 30 years and know the games that people play. See, when we start making sure that people respond to and acknowledge that we can't have all these sole source contracts, we can't have all these retroactive contracts, we can't continue to not be fair and not be just. I know the games that people play because it's not about reading about the games people play. It's not about reading and talking to people about it. I understand it because I lived through those games. I'm one that has fought those things all across this nation. And that's the key. It's about equity and inclusion. It's about making sure that it's a fair chance for everyone in the state of Maryland.
Thank you very much. Make sure I'm not muted. Thank you very much. So I'll come back to you, Mayor Adams. So now that we understand your vision is the most important part of the job, tell us what makes you uniquely qualified to be the next comptroller for the state of Maryland. Another 2 minutes.
I'm uniquely qualified for the job of the comptroller because I'm the only one who brings the experience to the office. I'm the only one who brings 30 years of experience in both the private and the public sector. I'm the only one who has built budgets and had to manage them as well. I'm the only one who, just like the comptroller, has had to make payroll to many, many people. I'm just like the comptroller. I have to make sure that we have 12 different offices around the state. We have over 1,000 employees, close to 1,200. I'm the only one who has managed large organizations. I'm the only one who has brought that experience there. You see, I understand what it takes to run the comptroller's office. I understand what that 30 years brings. You know, I'm the one who can change all the challenges we have. You know, we have very sly prime contractors who are trying to always avoid, as I said before, fulfilling the minority participation rules. We have a lot of people who just do not follow the rules in our agencies. Somebody's got to be able to close the loopholes, and I know how to do that. I know how to make sure that we look at contracts and make sure that I will not vote for them if, number one, they don't have the minority participation already in there. I got to make sure that we don't have RFPs that have language in them that make them so restrictive that they're almost directed to one company. Usually, it's the incumbent. I want to make sure that we don't bundle contracts so that the minority and small businesses can't participate because they made them so big. I want to make sure that we attempt to try and get the word out to the agencies beforehand and make sure that we advocate for our small businesses there. I'm the only one with that 30 years of experience.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. So Delegate Brooke Lierman, what makes you uniquely qualified to be the next comptroller for the state of Maryland?
Thank you for that question. You know, I think that it's important first and foremost to talk about the job of the comptroller. It is to create equitable financial prosperity for everyone. You need to have a vision and you have to have the ability to get things done in state government. And I can, right? I have been a fiscal leader. I understand how our state budgeting process works because I was a subcommittee chair on our state appropriations committee overseeing our $52 billion state budget. I'm chair of the Joint Pension Committee and for the past 8 years have been in the weeds on our pensions, understanding how they work, sometimes how they don't work, and how to make them better. I understand that the Board of Public Works, which the comptroller sits on, it's not just about stamping yes or no on contracts. It also writes all the procurement regulations that we have as a state. Well, I've sat on the regulatory committee for the past 5 years because the former speaker appointed me because he knew that I not only have a vision for how government should work for people, I sweat the small stuff and I get things done. So I'm excited to bring my ability, my experience as an attorney, right, representing businesses, blind-owned businesses around the country in federal and state procurement processes. I'm excited to bring my experience as a leader in the state legislature, passing legislation that affects the comptroller's office, that creates more accountability and transparency. I'm excited to bring my experience at working in the community, to get things done with people, to understand what it means when a senior citizen doesn't have access to somebody to help them file their tax returns, the impact that that can have on their life, right? I've seen all of this, and I have the ability to create great teams, work together to get things done for people. That's why I'm so excited to be running to be the next comptroller.
Okay, thank you very much. And so I will come back to you, Delegate Lierman. Talk to us about your values. Talk to us about how your values have been reflected in work that you have personally already done. Yes, talk to us about that.
Sure. So if I had to sum up my values, as I said before, I think it's, first and foremost that I fundamentally believe that, as Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better. And so throughout my life, I have tried to lead a life, or I have led a life of public service, right? Whether it was in college, starting the DREAM program, the mentoring program, when my family and I settled in Baltimore, digging in, joining my community association, becoming an advocate on transit. I saw how poor the bus system worked. And for me, I tried to take the bus. I was disappointed that it didn't come, but for the 1/3 of Baltimoreans who don't have access to a car, when the bus doesn't come, it's not a disappointment, right? It's a disaster. And so I decided to do more and to get involved. And I joined the Red Line Stationary Advisory Committee, and eventually was appointed to the whole citywide Red Line citizens group to make sure that people had a voice in Red Line development. I saw the injustice and inequity that existed in Baltimore in my community, and being an attorney and doing pro bono work wasn't enough. So I ran for office. I have loved living my values as a state legislator, and I'm excited to take them working on behalf of families to the comptroller's office. The legislation that I've brought, I think, reflects my values, whether it's passing legislation to ensure that we are not discriminating against people in housing because of their source of income. We passed the Home Act, whether it's ending prohibiting the use of suspension and expulsion for pre-K to second graders, a bill that I championed and passed, whether it's banning styrofoam to make sure we're actually taking care of our environment, right? I helped pass the first state-based, community-based gun violence prevention bill. Like, these are essential things to make sure that we all have the opportunity to thrive, because at the end of the day, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And I believe that government can help be there to remove barriers and create opportunity for everyone.
Thank you very much. Mayor Adams, tell us about your values and how they've been reflected in the work that you've already done.
Well, I think my values start with my parents. One of the things my mom used to always say to us, and she taught us as kids, and that is, if you do something for somebody expecting a thank you, you did it for the wrong reason. And so I've lived my life in such a way that I do things not expecting a thank you, but because it's the right thing to do. When I started my business, I created an opportunity for people such that everyone, no matter what your race, religion, or creed, had an opportunity to go somewhere to work that you were rewarded based upon your accomplishments and treated fairly. I became mayor. One of the things I did when I became mayor is we looked at all the discrepancies, all the things we've done. When you talk about what have I done? I've fought all across this country to tear down barriers for equity and inclusion. I mean, I've testified before the Senate subcommittee on small business and talking about leveling the playing field. I've met at the White House and tried to create opportunities and try to make sure that we have capital for business starting. But even as a mayor, where a lot of people know that's where the rubber hits the road. As mayor, I came in and we realized the health discrepancies. So I put in place a public health officer for the first time. As mayor, we were challenged with what was going on with, we were putting in place where we could do a police accountability. We put in there where we wanted to make sure that everybody was treated fairly, so that every policy in the city would be reviewed by an outside source for equity and inclusion to make sure everybody was there. We're bringing in a contract specialist so that the city of Bowie will now have an MBE program to make sure that it's leveling the field for everyone. I fought legal battles, as I said, to make sure that small business have their chance. I have worked my entire life at being able to be who I am now and being able to help others.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll come back to you, Mayor Adams, with the question from the chat. You'll have a minute to answer. What is your understanding of the key issues we face here in Howard County? And what would you do as comptroller to help address those issues?
I think in Howard County, there are some real issues. I think number one is education. We always need to understand that education is so important everywhere for our children. We need to understand also about the flooding. You know, that's an issue in Howard County that we have to address. You know, I sit on the Critical Area Commission for the Bay and the Atlantic regions. And so I understand some of the issues and what we need to do about those things. So, you know, there are many things that we have to address, but in Howard County, we need to make sure that we do those things, that we make sure that people have it, that we look at education, that we look at the flooding, that we look at making sure that there is more opportunity, i.e. so that there's more business and transit there. We need to make sure that people can get around the county easily and create opportunities for themselves. And I want to congratulate Calvin Ball for his great leadership in trying to get a lot of that done.
Thank you very much. And then Brooke Lierman, Delegate Lierman, 1 minute, same question.
Thank you so much. Really important question. I will start by saying I've loved getting to know many of you as I've spent time in Howard County before I started running for office and now on the campaign trail. I've loved running a 24 county campaign and being really present in communities, talking with people about our public schools, making sure that there's enough money to fund and build the public schools to accommodate Howard County's growth. Affordable housing, right? There are huge needs for more affordable housing around the state and certainly in Howard County as well. We need to make sure that people have a place to live, right? Transportation. I chair the General Assembly's, or I founded the General Assembly's Transit Caucus. And one of the things I've worked with the Howard County leadership on is the RTA and making sure that we're funding RTA so that it can expand access so that people who don't want to drive or people who can't drive or our older adults and senior citizens have options for how to get around. And then, of course, resilience. I've loved working with Courtney Watson and Katie Fry-Hester to build a more resilient infrastructure and pass legislation to help build more resilient infrastructure. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to our lightning round. We're actually going to give you 20 seconds instead of the usual 10. I know, right? Some extra time. I'll start with you. Climate change. Talk to us. What is the comptroller's role in fighting climate change? Or do you believe there is one?
Yeah, the comptroller's role is essential in combating climate change. And I have a plan on my website. That's why the League of Conservation Voters and Sierra Club endorsed me, because of my leadership on climate change in the legislature. We need to be making sure that every dollar that we spend is climate resilient. We're not just building a new school, we're building a net zero school. We're not building them in a floodplain, we're thinking through the future. We have to make sure our dollars are being spent in a climate resilient way.
Thank you very much. And if we can get another 20 seconds on the clock, I will pose the same question regarding climate change to Mayor Tim Adams.
I think it's important. Like I told you, I'm on the Coastal Area Commission, so I'm working every day as we do as a commission to make sure we do that. We also need to understand, we really have to understand that the comptroller has control over the tidal wetlands program on how we do that, as well as plays an important role on the open spaces area. And that will keep us from having environmental impacts.
All right, thank you very much. And so we will allow both of you to give a 1 minute closing statement. Since I already have Mayor on screen, we'll start with you, Mayor Adams. 1 minute, your closing statement for the Columbia Democratic Club.
Okay, I think it's just important that we understand, and it's just a fact. The reality is the role of the comptroller is the chief fiscal officer. It's not that of a legislator. I think what we need for the state of Maryland, as we're seeing spiraling inflation, as we see the possibility of a recession, we need someone who's taken a business, a large business, through both 2 recessions and a pandemic, and a city through a pandemic without raising the taxes. Someone who knows and understands how to follow the dollars, how to manage an organization that has a diverse workforce and a diverse location for the people. We need somebody who has 30 years of experience in managing budgets and building budgets and making sure that we can hold people accountable. It's that executive leadership that is truly what the comptroller needs to be. And I bring 30 years of that with the integrity that is needed for the job.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention to our questions, and I will move for your 1-minute closing statement to Delegate Brooke Lierman.
Thank you. So we are facing a critical juncture in this state, right? We have some of the most prosperous communities in the country, but we also have far too many that continue to suffer from poverty, from disinvestment, and the effects of racial discrimination. This is our time to get it right. As the elected chief financial officer for the state of Maryland, our comptroller needs to be a leader who embraces creative ideas and has the courage to put those ideas into action, from big ideas on wealth building policies to the little details that just make it easier for families and businesses to pay taxes and access state programs and benefits. Because of my experience, I am ready to lead from day one. I've helped oversee our state budget, our pension fund. I've led the fight for broadband entrepreneurs and building an equitable state. And I'm ready to take this knowledge and keen understanding of the office and our state and put it to work for all of you. I'm proud to have the support of so many of my colleagues in the General Assembly, of Congressman Jimmy Raskin. And I know that we can help Maryland rise to meet this moment. So I hope I can earn your support. I hope I can earn your endorsement and your vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And everyone, I appreciate your attention. These are the comptroller candidates for the state of Maryland, Mayor Tim Adams and Delegate Brooke Lierman. We appreciate both of you sharing our time with us this evening and answering our questions. I would remind